would do would be to respond with violence. And violence is sort of a currency for them. It's what they use to get their way.
During the entire Prohibition era, 700 people were murdered in Chicago in bootlegging or Prohibition-related crimes.
Torrio and Capone won the first round of the gang wars. Confident that control was restored, Torrio went on a 4-month cruise, leaving Capone in charge, giving him license to become the most powerful man in the city. 1924 ushered in a new era for Al Capone. In Chicago, corruption took a detour when a law and order man was elected mayor. Despite his personal distaste for Prohibition, he enforced it. So Al set his sights on opportunities for growth in the suburbs, starting with Cicero.
It only made him seem to be a much stronger criminal leader. By expanding into the suburbs, he was really able to seal up Chicago lock, stock, and barrel for his own.
Cicero was made to order for Capone's gang. It was a working-class bedroom community of 60,000 where bribery worked like a charm. From suburban headquarters at the Hawthorne Hotel, Al cut deals with local officials to operate beer and gambling joints. To keep his power base, Capone rigged the Cicero election. His men shot, beat up, and held voters hostage who were opposed to mob rule. On Election Day, April 1st, 1924, the Capone ticket was victorious. But Al suffered one major defeat. His 30-year-old brother Frank was killed in a shootout with Chicago police.
The death of Frank Capone, I think, had a profound effect on Al and turned him from a kind of low-key Johnny Torrio type of racketeer into a much more desperate and violent hoodlum. It made him feel that his own life could be cut short at any time and that he would go for as much as he could.
The week after Frank's death, Capone opened Cicero's first betting parlor, the Hawthorne Smoke Shop. Capone always said he had bad luck with horses, but now it didn't matter because he got a hefty take of racetrack profits, especially when the races were fixed. To his friends, he doled out hot tips like candy.
He and his bodyguards were walking around, and he comes by the racetrack and he says, "Hey kid, how you doing?" He says, "You see number 6? He said, "He's going to win." So one of his goons came over and slipped a ticket in my pocket. It was a $5 ticket. The horse went off at 60 to 1, and with my $5, I think I collected something like $300 and something.
Capone and his boss, Johnny Torrio, now had their hands in the till of 160 gambling joints and 123 saloons just in Cicero. Not everyone, however, was so impressed. A crusading 21-year-old newspaper editor, Robert St. John, was disgusted. In his paper, he exposed town leaders on the mob payroll and detailed a Capone brothel with a death chamber run by Al's older brother, Ralph.
And of course, that made me an enemy of the Capones. As I was going to my office early one morning, I glanced up and saw a big black touring car come roaring toward the intersection. This car screeched to a halt and 4 men jumped out. I recognized Ralph Capone immediately, and they headed for me, and I was halfway across the intersection. I dropped to the ground, curled up, and put my head between my legs, and they gave me a real working over. Blackjacks and billies, but the interesting weapon they used was a cake of soap in a knitted woolen sock. This was one of the Capone's favorite murder instruments, because if using this instrument, if they hit the base and the neck and the base of the skull, you can kill a person.
This time, though, it didn't work. St. John survived and was hospitalized.
And when I got out to pay my bill, the cashier of the hospital said, "Oh, your bill was paid this morning." And I said, "Oh, there's some mistake. He can't have been paid." Oh, yes, they described the man who had paid it. A slight scar on his left cheek.
It was Capone. To add insult to injury, Big Al had also bought controlling interest in St. John's newspaper. Capone's takeover of other suburbs was easier. In Chicago Heights, he helped local mobsters win their gang war. In return, Capone made a financial killing, gaining an interstate bootlegging network.
At one time it was reported that Chicago Heights was worth around $36 million to him. By having the Chicago Heights people behind him, his network would virtually double in size.
Capone joined forces with the Chicago Heights mob, and in a town where corruption ruled, the big fella was royalty.
And there were times when he'd ride in an open car and people would come up to him and shake his hand, and you know, he would treat people like they were his friends, like they were family, and because of that, they had a lot of respect for him.
That respect paid off. While Capone's boss, Johnny Torrio, was away on his cruise, Al expanded operations, formed new allies, and reaped the profits.
When Torrio came back, if there had ever been any question in Torrio's mind that Al Capone was the man to succeed him, that ended it.
There was also no question about Capone's explosive temper or loyalty. On May 8th, when Al's accountant, Greasy Thumb Jack Guzik, whined that he'd been kicked around by a local bootlegger, Al took aim. He unloaded a six-shooter into the culprit's head, point blank, in front of 3 witnesses. No one forgot it, but no one would say they remembered it. Al went into hiding, but later turned himself into the police, saying he was out of town the day of the murder. Once again, he beat the rap.
There was no way to get Capone on any of the substantive charges. You couldn't get a jury. They knew what would happen to them if they voted a conviction against a gangster. And they said as much. People would ask to be excused. I'd have to carry a gun the rest of my life, said one of them asking to be excused.
Capone knew it. He went about his business, ordering the elimination of people who refused to cooperate.
The one-way ride was the preferred method. Let's get him in a car and let's take him to a nice secluded place and shoot him and dump him out of the car. So there are no 1 witnesses, 2 innocent bystanders, or any particular problems beyond it.
Capone's biggest problem that had to be taken care of was Northside gangster and well-known florist Dion O'Banion. O'Banion had plenty of power and money, but wanted more. He made a fatal mistake when he tried to swindle Capone and his boss, Torrio, on a brewery deal. On the morning of May 19th, Torrio got arrested in a Prohibition raid O'Banion knew about. Torrio was on his way to the slammer, but not before he'd get revenge. Once again, New York triggerman Frankie Yale got the nod. Yale would do the job with 2 local hitmen. They decided to kill O'Banion on November 10th when he was busy preparing flowers for a gangster funeral. When the 3 hitmen walked into the flower shop, O'Banion reached out to shake Yale's hand. Yale held on as the others pumped O'Banion full of lead. It was the end of O'Banion and the beginning of a bloody gang war. That's because in January 1925, 2 of O'Banion's men, George Bugs Moran and Jaime Weiss, tried to avenge their boss's murder and went gunning for Capone and Torrio. They missed Al, but managed to ambush Torrio. Torrio recovered and was sent to prison on the Prohibition charge. In March, while serving time, he announced his retirement. To no one's surprise, leadership of the mob was passed to Capone, then just 26 years old. The youthful mob boss was front-page news. He liked being in the limelight. When accused of a crime, he'd call a press conference.
And he'd say, hey, look, fella, I had nothing to do with this. Please, get off of my back.
But the truth was Capone had everything to do with Chicago's increasingly vicious gang violence. Al was now a moving target. He shielded himself in his new high-security headquarters in the plush Metropole Hotel. Secret tunnels helped Al and his men make quick getaways. He never went anywhere alone. Capone had more security than President Calvin Coolidge. He rode in a $20,000 customized Cadillac limousine that was more like a tank. It was 7 tons, armor-plated, with bulletproof glass. The back window could be yanked when gunmen had to fire at their enemies. Capone now had his share.
They kept encroaching on each other's territory. Wasn't supposed to happen, it did. They shot each other. Capone was going to have to eliminate one by one the opposition again. Bring one by one, bring them all in line.
All Capone had to do now was give the orders. He did, and he never looked back. 1925 echoed with gunshots. Violence was escalating with no end in sight. Al Capone and his enemies were fighting with a new weapon, the Tommy gun.
It immediately changed the rules of the game because they were much more violent than pistols. Once you combined a machine gun with a moving car, you had a lethal instrument, the likes of which had never been seen before. So they upped the ante in all the gangster wars.
Chicago was, for better or worse, kind of the example par excellence of gangland and gangland violence. The violence was much more noticeable and spectacular here than, say, in New York or elsewhere.
Capone, however, brought violence to New York. He went there in late December to take his son to a doctor. Then he gave his buddy Frankie Yale a Christmas present, slaughtering 3 of Yale's enemies. Capone and his men were arrested. As usual, all the witnesses were silent, and the charges were dropped. Al came back to Chicago, to 1926 and the continuing gang war. The stakes were getting higher when on April 27th, Al led a 5-car assault on a rival gang. Outside a Cicero bar, Capone and his men opened fire. The tally, 3 wounded, 3 dead, including a 25-year-old assistant state's attorney. Bill McSwiggan had stayed close with his childhood buddies who were Capone's enemies. There was an outcry over the murder of a public official, so Capone vanished.
In fact, he went to Lansing, Michigan, where he hid out at a little cottage with his mistress for the summer until the heat was off. After a while, he began negotiations with the Illinois state authorities and delivered himself into their custody.
Despite a major investigation, a coroner's inquest, and the convening of 6 grand juries, Capone was never indicted. Once again, he got off, proclaiming his innocence. Capone appeared untouchable.
In fact, one day he went to a courthouse, a jail, and a police station asking if there was any policeman there, any cop, any detective, any judge who wanted to arrest him. Nobody did. Nobody dared. And of course he brought a reporter around with him to show that he was not a wanted man in Chicago.
I was the only photographer, and the paper had the only reporter with him. And we went to all these places. And all these places wanted nothing to do with him.
Not everyone stayed out of Capone's way. Trigger-happy Jaime Weiss and Bugs Moran traded shots with Al all during the summer of 1926, but none hit their mark. The most spectacular attempt of all came in late September. Capone was having lunch at the Hawthorne restaurant when a 10-car caravan filled with Weiss's men roared around the corner. Machine gun fire split the air. Capone leapt up and started to run.
His bodyguard, it registered on him before it registered on Capone that something is wrong and there's going to be more. They must have been blanks to make us find out what's happening. He dove forward, knocked Capone to the floor, and was holding him down when the rest of the cars came by with real machine guns, and they just shot up the entire block. Finally, a gunman got out, knelt in the doorway, and sprayed the whole place.
5,000 bullets blasted the coffee shop in just under 10 minutes. It was destroyed, but amazingly no one was killed. Capone paid hospital bills for the 1 person injured. Then he turned his attention to getting rid of Weiss. Capone ordered his men to rent rooms that overlooked the Weiss-Moran headquarters. When they spotted Weiss crossing the street, they opened fire. 1 more problem eliminated. Soon after, Bugs Moran became leader of the North Side Gang. Capone sent him condolences about Weiss, denying any involvement with his assassination. In late October, Capone made a peace agreement with Moran and other gang leaders. Al later said, "There's plenty of beer business for everybody. Why kill each other over it?" At age 27, Capone's power in the underworld was growing, but he craved recognition as